Fell in love with it.
Thanks so much, Jay.
Blew my mind. And it worked. I wanted to buy my thing.
Jay is, I would say, the Yoda of sales calls, man.
Just talking to Jay, he was so good at just taking what it is, seeing the opportunity and the value and the real reason we are making it.
Talk to Jay, because he got it. He can definitely help you out.
Talk to Jay. You're going to get a lot. You're going to gain a lot.
I would absolutely recommend him for any position that you have.
Jay's definitely the guy.
Give him the chance, give him the opportunity. You won't regret it.
He's good at what he does, so I highly recommend him, and I would book him before he is fully booked out.
Hey, welcome everyone to the Sales Ninja Show podcast. My name is Jay, also known as the Sales Ninja, and I'm very excited to bring my new guest. And this gentleman has a list of accolades that runs long, and I want to just share with you some of the things that this man has accomplished. He has helped his goal is to help over 415,000 veterans on LinkedIn in their sales careers to help increase their income by at least 30%. So he has helped with consulting, comprising of a team of sales practitioners, helping them get to the top 1%. He also has a sales platoon where he focuses on translating highly skilled, resilient, dedicated, adaptive, and disciplined men and women from active duty to a career that aligns well. And so he has been able to take them from zero to hero. As a global speaker, he delivers keynote presentations, live or virtual events on leadership and sales. He also developed speaking and training programs that he implemented across the military recruiting stations on how to recruit better. As a man who is a family man and loves to travel, he's a father of 4 wonderful kids, one who is now in the Air Force. And also, he has been able to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, which is a huge accomplishment, visited over 30 countries, and also was a U.S. Army and 5th Special Forces group member, served in the first of 187th, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Rakuten Special Forces Group, an Army Combatives Master Trainer, awarded the title of Kentucky Colonel, developed and implemented an active shooter and insider threat course called ARC across the military and corporate America, trained NATO and Dutch Special Forces in Afghanistan, trained Special Forces in Germany and Embassy, is also a 6-time MMA world champion, a first-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, featured in I believe it's the Netflix Fight Church, or maybe not, Fight Church and the Saint. You can correct me if I'm wrong. 2 documentaries highlighting his MMA career and his faith, which some would say is water and oil, so we'll go into that as well. Featured on the front page of New York Times, and also in his business and leadership. He has over 25 years of sales and coaching experience with the top 1% producers. He brokered a multi-million-dollar joint venture between a U.S. company and Afghan company while in Afghanistan. Rebranded, I'm running out of breath, guys. Rebranded 2 companies and grew their social media accounts from 3,000 to over 30,000 followers. 3 years of B2B experience, direct selling company incentives. Top recruiter for 2 years. Authored Fighting Preacher and currently working on his 2nd book, and featured in sales-based reality TV show. I'm out of breath. Okay, that is the biggest intro and the longest intro. And I was telling John, and this is the first time we're meeting, thank you and welcome to the Sales Ninja Show podcast, that's a very, very impressive list of achievements, and your response was you're just old. I beg to differ. So let's start by jumping in. So what on earth, from your journey as an entrepreneur, maybe from dating back into your earlier years or childhood years, causes someone to get to a level where you're at climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, serving in the special armed forces, being able to train some of the highest and most elite special forces. What was the the backstory. Like, not everyone can become a 6-time MMA champion. Not everyone is going to become a first-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or featured in 2 documentaries. Where did it all start?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on the show. And that's actually an amazing question. I think it really starts from that I had a real rough upbringing. I had no money. My parents didn't have a lot of money. Because we're both in sales, so we know what mortgage industry is and the interest rates now and the way people complain. When I was a kid, the interest rates were like 15 and 16%, So there wasn't a lot of money, and had a bunch of stuff happen in my life. And I just decided, whether that's through the trauma of it all or just that I was made differently, that wasn't the life I wanted to live. And so as I grew, I started doing sales at a young age. I was doing sales by the time I was 15, and just always wanted to achieve more and to perform, and joined the Army young and started doing crazy stuff in the Army. And it's just followed me through.
Wow. So I know you gave the short version, which means that you're a sales master. Concise, short and sweet, right? Brief and amazing. Yeah. That's why, getting to the point is getting you more sales. So I respect that, mad respect. You just ninja-fied your respect in my mind. So sales at the age of 15, not a lot of money with a rough upbringing. Let's dig a little bit deeper.
Sure.
What kind of events in your upbringing were causing, difficulties and trauma, if you don't mind? And just go in as deep as you like.
Yeah, he's a much different person now, but my dad was pretty abusive when I was growing up. There was a lot of sexual abuse that wasn't from my family. There was just a bunch of different events like that when I was a young man that left me in a position where I never felt protected, never felt like that I could trust. And so everything, as far back as I can remember, has been, I have to do it on my own because nobody's going to rescue me. If I want something, I have to go get it. If there's something that needs to be accomplished, nobody else is going to do it for me, and it has to be me. And that led to lots of fights in school, which, also is probably why I do a lot of jiu-jitsu and fighting. So there was just a bunch of that kind of stuff growing up. Getting jumped, violence at my home, all that kind of stuff. And you have really just a couple of options in life. You can either choose A, to overcome those things, or B, succumb to them. And you can either be a victim or you could be somebody who uses it to your advantage.
Wow. Okay. So as a dad, and I know you're a dad of 4, I'm a dad of 3, and getting sexually abused is, a nightmare for any parent. How, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, but whatever you can share, how do parents and or children protect them from this kind of atrocity, this kind of trauma?
I can tell you I've done a pretty good job with my kids. My ex-wife has as well. We both went out of our way to monitor whose houses our children are at. Just hyper aware of the danger. And so, trust your gut. If somebody gives you a weird feeling, don't let your kid go over it. That's just the bottom line, right? But we spent time with the parents. We wouldn't let our kids go over to anybody's house that we didn't know. And I think for the most part, if I were to die today, I think one of the things I'd probably be most proud of is that my kids didn't have to go through, I don't know what the rating of the show is, but my kids haven't had to go through any of the shit I went through. And I'm happy about that. I'm very happy about that.
Currently, there is no rating. You just speak from your heart. I know you were both men of faith.
For the parents that are watching, just trust your gut and just use a little bit of common sense, right? Be mindful of who your kids are hanging out with. Look for the red flags. I think that we're far more aware of it now than when probably you and I were kids. So
yeah, but in one sense, it's the people that are trusted the most that we don't get the bad vibes or the red flags that are the ones that abuse and hurt and become the offenders. So what advice do you have for parents and or kids when those red flags, when that, the spidey senses don't go up?
I think it's the same in sales, right? You got to trust your gut. I was just having this conversation the other day with a young man who's just recently made it pretty big in sales. And he was asking me a couple questions about a potential partner. And I said this, I would rather trust my gut and be wrong and go against my gut and then be wrong. So trust your gut. You'll see them, but then we logically, so for example, if you and I were drinking buddies and, we did tours together in the military, I tend to overlook those things and overlook those gut feelings because I've known you for so long. So parents, if you're listening, don't dismiss when you get those bad feelings. Investigate it, right? Might not be right because our gut is wrong on occasion, but I'd rather trust my gut and be wrong than not trust it and then be really wrong.
And this might be a weird question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because for the other people who are asking and wondering, I think that was a pearl of wisdom that you said of trusting your gut. Is there a way to train your gut feelings? Because some people may be very trusting or what's the word that I'm thinking of? Like naive. Yeah, naive. Because of their trusting or because they're raised in a I don't know if it's a loving, sheltered family, they haven't actually been able to gain the skills, or maybe the age didn't allow them to, or the experiences. Is there a way to learn how to trust your gut feelings? I don't know if that's a weird question, but
it's not a weird question. So I had a situation happen when I was training in the Army. The situation was somebody got really seriously injured. Was unconscious for about 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes. When it first happened, because I was a professional fighter, I saw what happened and I knew what was happening. So I ran over and I immediately knew that this was life and death for this kid. So they did a full-blown investigation, and one of the things that came out in the investigation was, why was I the only one who recognized the danger of the situation? And the truth is the only reason I recognized it because at that point in my career, I had 50, 60 some fights, had refereed by that point probably 1,000 fights and seen tons of knockouts. Seen people collapse, seen tons of scenarios of injuries and stuff like that. So the truth is that our gut is very much the same way as that kind of instinct when I saw that scenario unfold. Unfortunately, one of the only ways to develop is to be put in positions where you have to rely on it. And you'll either develop a great amount of confidence in your own inner voice, or you'll look for ways to exclude yourself from those kind of scenarios. And so it's not an easy answer for most people. But the truth is that if you really want to be better at that part of it, you have to put yourself in positions where you have to trust your gut.
Wow. Oh, man. I could see us doing a weekly podcast, but boy, oh boy, there's so much here. So you got to put yourself into positions where you have to learn to swim, not sink. There's the YouTube video where a Harvard study that looked at all the successful people. The key factor to success was a marriage of 2 P's, which is passion and perseverance, which develop grit. And, you're a father of 4. I'm a father of 3. I had a very difficult upbringing as well as a struggling immigrant family. A lot of racism. Our car got torched. We moved. There was, a Scarborough rapist at the time. There's a lot of discrimination. A lot of names being called. We were minorities. Even my parents didn't make it easy because a very performance-driven family where they bent over backwards to move to a country where they knew no people and they didn't understand the language, and they had to get re-educated as a dairy scientist and a nurse, both professions, where they had to go back even though they were working in their respective hometowns. This grit, when we don't provide it in our family, where the kids, because you've been quite successful in life, they may not be experiencing, you said didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of healthy people in your life, including family, like a dad,
Yeah.
had a rough upbringing, lots of trauma. They're not experiencing nearly the intensity and the amounts of trauma. And arguably, people would say those are the things that help you develop the grit. Now, when that is not in place, are you putting the kids in a situation where they're in the storm, or where they need to learn how to swim, or are you trying to give them a life that is better than you lived, but then they lack the drive and motivation to live for themselves? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. So, first of all, what a freaking amazing setup there. Joe Rogan talks about this quote all the time, right? Hard times create tough men create good times create weak men create tough times. And so,
wow, that was so good, man.
Well, that was Joe Rogan, that wasn't me.
No, the fact that it like off, your heart, off the cuff.
Yeah.
Oh man, I got to go back to the show notes. That was incredible.
Yeah. So as a parent, you're trying to walk that balance of giving your children what you never had that's good for them.
Yeah.
Protecting them from all the things, like the stuff that you went through, your car being torched and discrimination and all that stuff, right? So you want to protect them from those kind of things. However, you have to find a vehicle that develops perseverance and grit and tenacity and mental toughness. So how do you do that? And for me, I've chosen to influence my kids into martial arts and wrestling. All my kids wrestle except for my oldest, who's in the Air Force. And so there's ways to do it without necessarily all the trauma. I think wrestling is probably one of the best ways to do it because the tenacity and the perseverance it takes just to be a decent wrestler, right? And I think there's part of it that where individuals like yourself and I who come from those backgrounds of all that calamity, for lack of better language, we have to be okay with knowing that our kids might not have the same drivers as we do because they don't come from the same brokenness. We'll all come from some sort of brokenness, right? There's probably tons of people listening that have had tons of horrible events in their life, and as parents our job is to make sure those things don't happen to our kids. Well, if we understand that, then we also understand that they'll probably not be motivated or driven the way we were. So you got to find a way to fabricate it in a safe construct.
I love that. That's brilliant. Someone who has been able to, in 25 years, as a top sales performer and a coach, producing the top 1% producers and being top 1%, if not 0.01% as a first degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was training downtown at Toronto BJJ.
Nice.
Black belt is a white belt that never gives up was the motto.
Yep.
I got only to the blue belt and then the pandemic happened. To be able to be a 6-time MMA world champion and train NATO and Dutch special forces in Afghanistan and training special forces in Germany. And like you are living, breathing, practicing what you preach as a man of faith, as a man who is a fighter of freedom. So many truths. I mean, gosh, like what? Let me just go into a selfish question just for my kids and for myself. What would you say is the best combination of martial arts that can help your children have the best self-defense and or fighting chance against any predator, and why?
That's actually a great question. So in a perfect world, I would start every child around the 4 or 5, 6 year old range in either a wrestling or a judo background.
Okay.
By the time they turn 12, 13, I would move them into jiu-jitsu. By the time they turned 16, 17, I would start adding boxing and Thai boxing. And I have a very specific reason why I frame it that way. The strength and the balance and the hip control that it takes in both judo and wrestling are super important as a younger individual, and there's less likely major damage from like arm bars, leg locks, those kind of things, right? Then as their body matures and their mind matures, then we can start adding those more dangerous kind of components to the fight game. the reason, when I was running my own martial arts gym, I was doing jiu-jitsu and MMA and Thai boxing. They had a great kids program. Parents would always ask me, when are we going to start striking? And I'm like, not for a long time. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because do you think your 12-year-old really has the wherewithal to know when it's time to break somebody's nose? I don't think most kids do.
No,
However, when it comes to just holding somebody down and pinning them, waiting for the teacher to come and rescue them, if they need to elevate and start to do chokes and arm bars, they can. That's at their disposal, right? But if we start with body control, both of yourself and your opponent, and that becomes the foundation of how we train children, I really think judo and wrestling is where you start, and the striking is on the back end once they have the maturity to know when it should go to the next level.
I love it. So you've obviously lived life, refereeing thousands of fights and also fighting in 50 plus MMA bouts, and in real life training these military elite.
Yeah.
What is one story of struggle, maybe a fight, whether it was in the octagon or whether it was on the field, in the real world where you were in arms and fighting? What is a story that you can remember that kind of was like, man, that was a life and death situation, and this is what I did to get obviously out of that situation?
Yeah. So I can answer that for me personally, or do you want to hear one from one of my students?
You know what? You can do both if you have time.
So I'll talk about my student first. His name is Eric. He was in 5th Special Forces Group. Phenomenal guy. They were in Iraq. This is like 2006-ish time frame. I have to go back and look at what year it was. They did an article in the paper about it. Number 2 bad guy in Iraq. They didn't know he was on site at that time.
Oh my gosh.
And Eric had a decision to make, and Eric could have either killed the guy or he could have restrained the guy, just the way the scenario played out.
Yeah.
Eric decided to do a double leg takedown. When the guy turned to his belly, Eric climbed his back and choked him unconscious. When they actually then restrained that guy and started to go through the procedures of taking him captive, they realized that they just caught the number 2 bad guy in all of that theater. And the information that we got out of that, because he chose and had the wherewithal to make a decision on whether he should be lethal or not. I don't know how many lives it saved, but a lot. And that story meant so much to me on so many different levels, because here I'm training this guy, and then he's in that situation where he had to make a split-second decision, and that was the route he went, and it worked. So, I mean, that was
Interesting. That's a great story. I mean, the fact that you're training people to do these and they're able to maybe follow their gut, as we talked about before, to be able to get the intel versus if you kill him, I mean, there is a victory or win there, but you're not able to get the information that you need to save more lives. Yeah. That's a very powerful story. Now, when you're training these guys, in special forces, like when you are on the mats and you're like, going 3, 4, 5 times a week into the martial arts gym or the BJJ gym, like what kind of atmosphere and training, because there's like so many different things that military soldiers need to do. Like it's not like they're dedicated to be an MMA fighter. Like how do you train these people, and what kind of conditions? Like you don't have probably like 100 mats. I don't know I don't know if you're on desert floors. Like how are you doing this? How are you training these people to become these lethal dismantlers of evil?
Yeah. So the number one thing is that we have the ability and the funding for anything that we determine is going to make our guys more lethal. And so we actually had one of the best facilities I've ever seen.
Oh, wow.
We had a huge building, all the tie pads, all the guns, all the knives, everything that you could want to train to the level that you wanted to train. So, and here's what I loved, because you brought up the mentality. So the difference in that room between that room and a BJJ room, which I've done lots of those, and a lot of those guys do as well, is that every single one of those guys is in the best shape of anybody you've ever met, outside of somebody like a UFC fighter. So that's number one. Number two, every single one of them that's in there is going to be in a life and death situation if not in the next couple of months, within the next 12 to 18 months. So their approach to training is very different. Number 3, they know that they're going to deploy into a potentially lethal situation, and the amount of respect that you have to have in order to train both to the highest level that you can while being as safe as you can, because I know that here in a couple of months, you're going to go back over to Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, wherever it is, right? And so there was just this bond that gets built between these guys. It's already, I think, really strong in the jiu-jitsu community. I've never seen anything like it, like I saw in that room. So
I love the answer. And are you teaching them mixed martial arts? Because obviously BJJ is one form with takedowns and grappling and stuff like that. But are you teaching them like a combination of hand-to-hand judo throws or strikes with Thai boxing?
Yeah. So here's the big difference between MMA and combatives. In MMA, there's a set of rules and there's a time limit. And typically speaking, there's no lethality, right? Let's see here, we're going on 30 years now, and nobody's died in the U.S. from MMA. It's not lethal, right? So that changes your training methodology because there's not a lethality involved.
Mm-hmm.
We do everything. We do striking, we do jiu-jitsu, we do guns, we do knives, we do dogs, we do all of it. So
wow.
Pepper spray tasers, electric knives, what we call simunition rounds, which are paint rounds and real guns. They've got paint tips instead of bullets. And one of the things that you're trying to do in those environments is to raise the level of the intensity as close as you can to real without it being real with the ramifications of life and death. So the training reflects that as much as we could.
I'm just amazed, and because I can only imagine, the level of intensity, the level of training, the idea of real life and death situations, and you're training because that you're going to be deployed, and these guys are in the best shape. So you're not like, you're not at a huge advantage when you're at a BJJ gym where you're fighting a white belt and you're a black belt, and that you're gonna put them into master them like a puppet and put them into a pretzel. You're fighting with guys and gals who know what they're doing, and the thing is that you don't want to injure yourselves because you have to be ready for war and battle. So that discipline and focus is I'm just amazed. I have to think and soak about that a little bit more. But I do want to get and pivot to the whole, how does this training and discipline prepare you for sales? What kind of lessons that were learned? We could do a whole year's podcast episode on your story.
But what about the military? So specifically with the tribe of guys I was with, and those kind of things. So sales is not easy, right? It's simple. It's not easy. You've got people telling people slamming phones on you, doors on you, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing about sales is the same thing as jiu-jitsu. As long as you don't quit, you'll figure it out. As long as you don't quit, don't get in your feelings. Don't let people hurt your feelings. You show up every day, because if you show up every single day, you, by nature of the role of sales, will get better. And it's the same in jiu-jitsu. I've never met anybody that was committed to jiu-jitsu and did it for year after year after year who didn't, at some point in that first 2 to 3 years, all of a sudden it comes together for them. I've never met one. In all the gyms that I've been in, and all the fights, and everywhere I've been in the world, from Japan to Thailand to Brazil, right? It doesn't matter. I've never met anybody who dedicated that time and did what they were supposed to and it didn't eventually figure it out. I would argue that lesson is the exact same lesson in sales. If you show up every single day and you just keep doing it, you'll make more money than you can make in any other career outside of maybe something like a doctor or a lawyer. You'll have time, freedom, able to do what you want to do with your life, to be present for your kids. It's not going to be easy, but it is simple.
It's going to be Easy, not simple. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. It's simple.
Oh, simple, but not easy.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But it is simple,
Wow.
right? Like at the end of the day, you really only have to understand two things to do sales. Whatever the product or the service is that you're selling, and then understanding people. That's very simple. What's not simple or what's not is the ease of it. It takes time. Like I got to talk to different people. I got to understand objections. Understand the problems with my product or my service.
You know, earlier we talked about JJ. You know, in my gym, it was the black belt who is the white belt that never gave up. And you know, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu track to get to the black belt is not an easy one, right? But the simplicity is showing up every day. And I saw people just, you know, start from white and surpass me just because of consistency. And it was just like, dang, I just got left behind. Right now they're putting me into chokes. And, you know, this 8 to 10 year track of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then I think there's, you know, to get even your first green or blue belt, if you're a younger kid, there's a certain age. I can't remember. It's a teenage age 16. Where you have to how old?
16. You can't get your blue belt until you're 16.
I love that. You know, versus I'm Korean, so Taekwondo obviously is something I took. And you see these 8-year-olds that are black belts, and I just feel like, you know, between the commercialization and the cash cow, that you know they're not really ready in terms of their maturity, their age, and then there's this overconfidence of like, man, I'm a black belt, right? And you're 8, and so that even to get the second belt, which is the lower rung in the black belt journey at 16, and being able to train like a beast, it tells me that there's something powerful about martial arts. But also in the same respect, you know, showing up every single day, we can actually be trained to do the wrong thing. You know, I'll take sports as an analogy. You know, I did golf for like 10, 20 years, and I got worse and worse and worse. But I kept coming back because I wanted more and more and more. And then I got a swing coach, and within the first 30 minutes, he fixed my swing. And I went from a 160-yard slice to a 270-yard, you know, drive. So I want to talk to you about, you know, so even doing sales and showing up is one thing, but what if we're being taught, you know, a way or a different way that is, you know, maybe not a good way, and we're saying, hey, that was the way that the expert taught me, so I'm going to really exert my leadership or be forceful or be aggressive. Like, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So the great thing is that I think by nature of our adaptation, right? Like the truth is that at some point, if you were taught wrong or you thought wrong or you're doing it wrong, whatever that story is, at some point, there's going to be some sort of light bulb that goes off in your head and goes, this is not netting me as much money as somebody like Jay is making. What am I doing wrong? Right? It's just like in jiu-jitsu, right? So if every single day, everybody in the room arm bars you, at some point you start to ask the question, why does everybody keep arm barring me? Well, it's because every time somebody mounted you, you stuck your hand straight up in the air and they went, oh, look, it's Christmas. Let me take that home. Sales is no different. At some point, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over, and it's not yielding the results that you want, you'll ask somebody, Jay, why is this not working? And then somebody who actually understands your service or your product is going to look at what you're doing and go, why are you doing that? Oh, well, Billy Bob Thornton told me to do this. Well, here, try it this way.
I'll never forget the time I walked into the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym, and as a white belt, you know, I got paired up with a blonde hair, blue-eyed, 110-pound, you know, and I thought to myself, this girl's in trouble, right? And then next thing you know, within 3 minutes, I was in an arm bar. She was like the Ronda Rousey of the gym, and she was a world champion. You know, she went to Abu Dhabi and all the world BJJ stuff, and and all the way up to black belt, she was a world champion. She was small but very strong and very technical and very quick. And she worked out, did performance training. I had no idea. I mean, you never know who you're up against, right? And I like what you said and did. That was pretty masterful. That I want people to catch in this podcast. You know, the example that John gave, you know, when we talked about training and sales and doing the right thing, And his example was, hey, maybe you're not netting as much as Jay is in sales commissions. You did a powerful thing. You caught my attention by using my name, and I was all in, like, whoa. And there's something powerful about being able to personalize and humanize, if you will, the sales call, because a lot of times people, know the nuances, especially because a lot of people are using the same sales training, same sales scripts, and they know just from the emotions and from being on different sales calls, quote unquote strategy calls, that there's a framework, there's a way forward of going through this sales process and kind of going through the motions. Is there anything that you can suggest from a sales expert who teaches and trains the top 1% performers? I just taught on sales scripting today. I just taught on frameworks. Do you teach something different, or do you teach them to do a certain methodology when you train them?
So I'm going to go back to my military time. I do framework. I do believe in script. I do believe in SOPs, or what we call in the military, SOP, standard operating procedures.
Yep.
However, the purpose of an SOP, standard operating procedure, is to get the entire group to think one way, so that they all know what this is supposed to look like, so that they can operate efficiently. The problem with SOPs is they're written generically, and they don't really address all of the various complexities that take place inside any scenario. Okay. So we want to start with that, but at some point, what you want to do is to be able to personalize that SOP to every individual conversation. And being able to, take that SOP and to personalize it into your own language. Like anytime I'm handed a script, the first thing I do is redline stuff I would never say. I would never say that. That's not in my personality. And I'll just use this because you brought it up. So you're Korean. Koreans have a different culture than white Americans, period. Yeah. So I might say something, and as a Korean talking to another Korean, you would never say that. Like ever, right? Yeah. And so if I give you a script that you haven't personalized, a standard operating procedure that you haven't personalized, and I put you in the wrong scenario, you're going to fail. Right? Now, this is why I love diversity in sales, because we tend to think about sales in this context of framework. But what do you do with that framework when all of a sudden I'm presenting to a group of African Americans as a white guy? What do you do with a bunch of Chinese people, or Taiwanese, or Korean, or Japanese? Right? When you start to think through that, there are a ton of reasons to individualize and to uniquely build out that framework inside the context of every individual conversation.
Wow. I love that. There's so many nuggets there from the SOPs, the scripts, the frameworks. The purpose is to get the group to think in one way. I love when you said to personalize that SOP, make sure that you understand the cultural nuances. Also understanding the person. And when you can personalize that and humanize it and speak to them at heart to heart, you will definitely, be able to sell more.
Let's make it super potent, right? Yeah. Imagine that you invited me to speak to a group with you, and I made the assumption that everybody in that room was Chinese instead of Korean. How does that play for me from there on out?
Not good.
It's very bad.
Right? Yeah.
And so this idea of taking framework, now we have to have framework to start with beginners, right? Because maybe I'm brand new to this product or brand new to this service. So the framework is super important, but the framework is meant to then free you to be flexible and move inside and outside of that framework. And I think a lot of people miss that.
Yeah. Amazing. So let's go to pragmatics. And then I know I to respect your time, we definitely need to do repeat offender to impact more people, because I think you have so much that I'm drawing from in terms of wisdom. I feel like you're a combination of the movie like Sniper, Fight Church, and David Goggins. Obviously, you're John Renken. and you're the real life superhero. You know, when you're handling objections with this, you know, incredible special forces background, 6-time, you know, MMA world champion, leader of leaders, coach of coaches, you know, basically help save hundreds and thousands of lives. When you're on a call and the prospect says, man, I'm really having a hard time believing that I can do this, meaning get into your program and get the results, and believing that you can help me get these results. And typically there's 3-4 main objections, and just want to set you up in just a moment about handling objections. You know, it could be time, it could be money, it could be belief, it could be, you know, I need to talk to a spouse, you know, one of those 4 main objections. When someone is struggling with their belief, whether it's in themselves or whether it's in their ability to trust and have confidence in you helping them, what do you say? We're just going to talk handling objections in sales.
Sure. So the first thing is that we have to understand that objections are that I'm interested. Because if I wasn't interested, so just imagine, right? I come to you and I'm like, hey, I really think you would do well at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Maybe you could even compete. I think that you have the physical tools, and what I've seen from you, that it would be really good. If you don't have a desire in your body to do jiu-jitsu, you don't object. You're literally like, yeah, no, that's not me. Thanks. And you're done, right? An objection means that I'm interested in some way, because otherwise I wouldn't have this kind of reason to why it won't work. So we got to understand that right off the rip. And then I think mindset and belief patterns are always an issue. I had a mentor of mine. He's a great friend of mine. He said this one time, and I was just a part of the room, and somebody said they couldn't. He goes, what'd you say? And they were like, oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. He goes, I want you to repeat after me. And they were like, oh, okay. He goes, I can't do that because that's the way I want it. And then he just let it sit. I was like, holy cow, right? Mm-hmm. And I think when it comes to belief, we could really, we could really dial that in with something like that example. Or the question I like to ask is, why wouldn't you bet on yourself? Like, where does that come from? Why wouldn't you bet on yourself? I'll bet on myself every day of the week. Sometimes to my own detriment. Sometimes I write checks my rear end can't cash because I bet on it. So I would always kind of ask that, right? Like, what is it that makes you think that you couldn't do this? Whatever that reason is, right? So, and then, time or the objection of, I got to go talk to my spouse, those things are simple to handle. And one of the things that I love about objections is typically whoever objects first wins. So you try to handle those things before they actually come up. It doesn't matter what you sell. There's always going to be 3 or 4 common objections to whatever your industry is, right? So if you know that it's a significant purchasing decision, before you ever sit down, you should be asking the question, hey, is there anybody else that needs to be a part of this conversation? And if you do that, then you can eliminate the objection before it comes.
Love it. Exactly what I taught today in today's Sales Psychology Masterclass. You can, in the 2-step close for the disco to strategy call, pre-qualify or qualify and book that call, because I do ABCs, which is always be closing. If you're not closing, always book that call, and be able to qualify them on decision makers or stakeholders so that in the next call, you're not wasting time to book another call. I've done that, made that mistake.
Horrible.
I'm not going to do that ever again. So I love the ideas of, changing the word patterns from can't to can. Henry Ford is whether you can or you cannot, you're right. I paraphrase that. And I love the objection of, why wouldn't you bet on yourself? Because, to a fault, like you said, we want to bet on ourselves and invest in ourselves versus this is the cost, which is a loss. Investment is a gain. But a Ninja Fi level 2, we'll call it, and this is the joke on Steven, I can't remember his name, Sue, whatever, on YouTube. He says there's a level of difficulty in video games, like level 1, 2, 3, and then there's an 8 level. which is like impossible. So the ninja fly level of, how about the people who don't have the confidence or the conviction, or, I mean, there's some people who just, like you said, they have zero desire, and they're like, just no, thank you, and let's not waste our time. Let me give you the gift of time back. But there are some people who just need to be encouraged or motivated, or just someone to believe in them. What do you say with people who lack that? You talked about the people who bet on themselves to a fault. What about the people who are not willing or able or struggling to bet on themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, you would really need to dig in there. And the way that I would dig in there is, what is the source of their pain? So everybody is motivated in one of two directions. And I've yet to see anybody that doesn't fall into one of these two categories. They're either motivated by the stick or they're motivated by the carrot. And so you've got to figure out which one motivates them and which one it is that's keeping them in their fear. Because it's not that they lack confidence, it's that they're afraid. There's something that they're afraid of. There's some fear that goes deeper than whatever it is, the product or the service that you're selling, right? And so I would dig and I would start asking really good questions about, what are you afraid of? What's the worst that can happen? What? And I'll use this example. So I have a very good friend of mine, was in Afghanistan, and he was on Anaconda, the mission Anaconda, where he was the sniper providing cover. People were shooting back at him. It was a horrible scenario, right? So he calls me up and he's like, "Hey, I've decided I'm gonna take my first fight." And I'm like, "Awesome." He goes, "I was wondering if you would come and corner me." And I was like, "Absolutely. Where's it at?" So I get there and we start warming up, and he is stiff as a board. I mean, he's just like, I'm like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And he's like, "Dude, I'm so nervous."
Oh, wow.
Nervous about what? He goes, "About how this is going to go." I go, "What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get knocked out. Like, nobody's shooting at you." And he said this, and it was so powerful when he said it. He goes, "I'm afraid of embarrassing myself."
Wow.
And, so you have these deeper level issues that go into that confidence piece and that assurance, right? And you've got to dig deep and figure out what it is that's causing them to feel that way, because that's all the surface stuff. It's really whatever's underneath that's causing it. So might take you a little bit longer to close that scenario, but if you want to do that person a favor, because they might not be a fit for you if that's where they're at, but you would want to at least expose that pain so that they could address it for their own career.
Wow. I love that. Digging deeper and asking better, open-ended, piercing questions, which is, what, when, where, how, why, versus yes and no answers that are deal breakers or deal makers. You have 50-50 chance, whereas this one will increase that percentage. What's the worst that could happen? What if you didn't do this? How are you planning to overcome this fear? Or how do you plan on learning how to fight? Like all these questions that dig deeper, it reminds me of when I got first introduced to BJJ, as a former pastor for 10 years and a missionary who was on donor support. One of my biggest major donors is the one who was in BJJ, and he invited me. He was going to pay my way for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and lunch. He got me on the lunch. I wasn't keen on the BJJ, and so I got into the gym, and my biggest fear was failing. Because I'm a very, very competitive guy, and losing even a sparring match or a grappling match, even though I know nothing, is my greatest fear. Because I don't like to play sports that I'm not good at, right? Like I suck at basketball, right? And going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I don't know anything, and I don't want to lose. So and my expectation is, because maybe I took a little bit of martial arts before, and I'm above average in terms of athleticism. Embarrassment, failure, losing are things that are not in my mindset. So I was getting, in the Shark Tank, tapped out and choked out, and it was very humbling. Girls, guys, doesn't matter. People smaller than me, people bigger than me. I had guys who were 250 pounds that just sat on me. That I just kind of gamified it, and this is maybe something that for the audience is gamifying and making it fun. Is like how do I? My goal was not to win at that point because I didn't know anything. My game was how long can I last, and can I beat the timer and not get choked out or get armbarred? And the more that I did that, the less I got, the less I lost.
Yeah. Well, small incremental victories always will surpass big victories. Right.
So that's interesting because, some people would think that, being able to beat the timer and not get choked out is not a win, but or it's not a loss, but it is a small incremental win because it's, versus getting armbarred or choked out. I saw a guy get armbarred and then he fell and he didn't know how to, what is that? I forgot the term. Break fall. Thank you. It's been that long. His finger bone came out of his finger, right? And it was right beside me because I was grappling and I saw that happen, and I was just like, oh my goodness. I mean, obviously, and then oh my gosh, the guy that was I was grappling with, he ended up in the news in the Toronto Star, which is the Toronto newspaper. He ended up he was a doctor, and he ended up dismembering his wife and putting into a suitcase and throwing into Lake Ontario. The guy that I was grappling at the time, crazy, right? And then the guy was really nice. And anyways,
serial killers are nice.
Oh my gosh! And that's the whole back to the book end from the beginning of sexual abuse of I never would have imagined the guy that I was grappling. He was a pretty small, like 130 pounds. I could take him pretty easily, but he's a medical practitioner and an expert surgeon, and he was able to dismember his wife, and put her into a suitcase and throw into Lake Ontario. Yeah. And it obviously ended up getting into jail. So, what is a high point in your sales career where you exceeded your own expectations that you look back and you say, man, I'm proud of that moment?
Yeah. So for the last 2 years in a row, my clients have had the greatest increase of income out of 3,000 clients. So I think my first year, or the first year I won it, my client had a 510% increase in income. Last year when I won, he had 198% increase in income. I've gotten to a point to where I've sold everything from widgets to cars to newspapers to whatever, and I'm more excited about what my clients are doing than my own stuff, because I've had really big months. I've had $140,000 month, and then I've had 0 months, right? But the reward of watching a client over the course of a year increase their income by 30, 40, 50, 100, 200%. I think that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Wow. And when you say that they're making this kind of money, are you talking about owners or are you talking about sales reps?
Yeah, sales reps. Mm-hmm.
And are you doing B2B? Are you doing enterprise? Are you doing SaaS? Who are you training?
Yeah, we do all of it. Like anybody in any type of sales process, we can coach and train. And so the one who had 198% increase is in B2B. Semiconductors, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
And then the client that had the 500 and whatever it was, 510%, he was in solar. So.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So I mean, that's direct sales all the way to B2B, semiconductor, very high-end stuff.
Okay. So to bring this plane to a landing, because I know we can go on and I do want to go on, so we'll have to do repeat episodes if you're open to it.
Yes, great question. So I'd love to come back.
Thank you. Likewise. I'm just a sponge learning everything that you're saying, because I'm just like, even though we're doing this podcast interview, I'm just like, I'm a student, and I'm just like, I'm a white belt in front of a black belt, literally just like, wow, this is amazing. So, you have people who are in the sales force from B2B, B2C, from semiconductors, from widgets, from software, from solar. And there are people who are listening here right now, either to the live or the replay, and they're ready to give up. They're on the fence because they're like, you know what? You hunt what you kill, and right now, in the last month, 2 or 3, sales has been down, marketing is broken, not getting, calendar event, calls, or I'm not able to work a certain territory because the quotas are going up. Like, you have all these different factors that are working against you. What is a word of encouragement that you can give to those who are on the fence or who are willing to give up, when you and I know that sales is probably one of the most powerful and top 1% skills that we can learn that can gift you a life that you could never dream of, but people are maybe looking at defaulting to a life where they become a slave to the corporate 9 to 5 and get in this place again.
What a petrifying thought.
Right.
So here's what I would say. All of life. It doesn't matter if we're a W-2 working that corporate 9 to 5 role, or we're a salesperson, or a 1099, or a business owner. All of life is cyclical. I mean, all of it, right? It's cyclical in our training. It's cyclical in our weight gain and weight loss, our sleep patterns. I mean, all of life. We go through stages where we're children, we become adults, we then have children, and then our children begin to raise us because now we're elderly, right?
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. Cycle. And what I would say to somebody who's struggling right now is the cycle will turn again. Hang in there. And now it depends on your motivation, but for me, when you said that corporate slave, that would be my greatest fear. I never want to go back to that life. Like,
me too.
Have somebody else dictate when I can take vacation.
Yeah.
Hey, it's 5 o'clock. I need you to stay for another 3 hours, or I'm going to fire you.
No.
Yeah, and so if you just stick with it, it will turn, and there will be seasons of rain and shine. There will be seasons of boom or bust, feast or famine. Just hang in there, because it will come back, and it will take some perseverance and some grit from you and some sacrifices. But the truth is, that's all of life, even if you go work back in a corporate slave where you got a guaranteed paycheck. Wow. Yeah, I think you and I both can resonate with not wanting to go back to the hamster wheel. And don't get me wrong, I actually enjoyed it when I was in there, but after being out of there and being able to live life on my own terms with the freedom, the finance, the flexibility, the faith, the friends that I get to spend time with, I can't go back. It's just like, here's a I'm dating myself. It's like when you get automatic windows and you're going to buy a used car and it has rolling windows. I can't go back. Right? There's no way I'm going to go back. We don't have to expose our ages. We could just go back a little bit, right? Do you remember?
That's what I heard. That's what I heard. That's what I heard. Yeah.
Like, could you imagine going back from the iPhone to a little ball in the sun?
Oh my gosh. Or if we're going to go there, rotary dial on the telephone.
Yeah. Oh, no. So, man.
We can't go back. Sales is one of the greatest gifts. And thank you, John, for enlightening me and everyone on the Sales Ninja Show podcast. We definitely got to return to another episode.
I would love to.
I think there's so much here that people need to be hearing and taking into practice and implementing and integrating into their businesses. You have a free gift that we'd like to offer to our audience. Can you explain that gift to the audience?
Yeah, I think most salespeople are sleeping on the power of LinkedIn. I've done a lot with my clients on LinkedIn. If you are interested in improving your outreach through free methods on LinkedIn and learning how to use that to increase your own sales production, there's a link that you guys can grab. You can go book a free time with me. I'll do a quick audit on your LinkedIn to help you to make sure it's positioned properly, to sell properly. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on it with you on your goals and what you're looking at to do in the sales field, and see if I can help you to achieve your own goals. So,
wow. Thank you so much for that gift. And I know that one-on-one time is your greatest asset. And because of the value and the results and the, from trauma to transformation, to just all the things that you've lived out, war, atrocities, assault, being able to equip and empower and educate people, you are a transformational leader. You are an incredible life changer, and I am so glad to be in the same room with you. You know, proximity equals power, network equals net worth. So I'm going to continue to rub shoulders with you. And as the prophet says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Thank you for the free gift. I'm going to book a call, and I definitely need help. So on behalf of the team here, thank you, John Renken, for your time once again. And for those of you who want to join the podcast, comment podcast, and thank you for your time today. We had an hour of power. The questions that we delve into are the journey of the entrepreneur, providing insights, strategies, and advice that resonate with the audience that is listening. And once again, our goal here at the Sales Ninja Show podcast is to help you to sell more so that you can give more.
Massive.